Good morning everyone. Welcome to part 2 in our ASP.NET security webinar, Simplifying the Rigmarole. We'll start out by taking a quick look at what we covered in part 1 and build on that. So for a recap, using the Microsoft ASP.NET Identity Framework, you can build a single identity system. Meaning you can take your application, whether it be web forms, MVC, web API, or even a combination, and have a consolidated or single identity system. It's really easy to add additional profile data in. And of course, out of the box, you've got provision for Microsoft logins, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and any other third-party auth that you might want. And a all-important OWIN integration as well. One thing I do want to mention is this presentation is about showing you how to quickly secure certain aspects of a website. It's not meant to be an authoritative be-all and end-all to commercial security by any means. There's also a number of ways in which you can achieve the same thing using other methods. Let's head straight over to Visual Studio and start building our application. Now I'm going to have SQL Management Studio open as well. We can see here that there are no databases at the moment inside my SQL Express instance. And we'll start with a file new project. As we did last time, I'm going to build this based on the ASP.NET web application template. We'll leave the name just as default and click OK. And I'm going to choose web forms. If I wanted to mix my technologies, I could incorporate some MVC and some web API. On the right hand side is the important authentication option. If I click change, I could switch to no authentication, organizational accounts, or Windows Auth. We're only interested in the individual user accounts at this point. So I click OK, and after a moment or so the solution is going to be created inside Visual Studio. One of the nice things with the ASP.NET Identity Framework is that it's built on top of the Entity Framework, which means that the tables and things will be created using a code-first model. So if I come into my web.config, bring up my Solution Explorer, scroll down web.config, I can quite happily change this connection string and remove the default option here of local database. We'll get rid of that, and instead we'll place our SQL Express instance in here. So removing those first parts, and do /SQL Express, and set the initial catalog to something a little bit more meaningful as well. We'll call this one our web test JC. That all looks good, and I'll close and save that. The other thing I want to do is set the project up for use with the Devexpress Control Set. I'm going to click on the Devexpress menu, come down to ASP.NET Controls, and say Run Wizard to update project. Now at this point the wizard's going to be presented. I'm going to go Update Project. I don't need to change any other settings. What's happening in the background is the wizard is going through and adding the DLLs to the project and adding the necessary references into the web.config as well. This just makes it cleaner for working with the Devexpress controls, as we'll see shortly. Now I'm not going to do anything else to the project right now. I'm just going to run it. My browser of choice today is going to be Internet Explorer. And when that launches, we're going to see the local web host, and I'm going to get presented with that nice boilerplate template website. First thing I'll want to do is register myself as a user. Clicking on the register button, I'm going to add the first user, which will be admin, and give it a password. Of course, out of the box, if I spell things wrong or mess up the password, it's going to tell me. So the validation's all built in. I'm not going to extend this profile model today. We covered that last time. I'm going to keep everything as clean and crisp out of the box as possible. Once I register that user, it's going to automatically log me in, as we can see here. Hello admin. If we take a quick look into the SQL Server Management Studio, we can see that it's now created the database. If I pointed that to an existing database, the cool thing would be that the tables would be created, not the database. So you can extend this into existing legacy applications. Now I've got a few queries that I want to run on a regular basis, so I'm just going to bring those in from a snippet. And we're going to be looking at the ASP.NET roles, user roles, and users table. At the moment we can see that we have one user called admin, which is correct, and it was a local user, so we've got a value in the password hash. Now let's implement the third-party handler. We'll do that by coming to the app start folder, bringing up startup.auth, and this is where we can see the commented out third-party providers. For speed, we're going to use the Google authentication because it doesn't require me to have to plug in any additional keys or secrets. If I compile and run that now, what we're going to see on the login page is some extra information. Choose login. We've now got this option to say use another service to log in. Because I've exposed only Google, we only have a button for Google. But if I implemented the Microsoft login, or Facebook or Twitter, we'd see a new button appear for each of those. I'm going to choose Google. It's now sending me off to Google for authentication. I'm going to log into Google with an authenticated account. My secret special squirrel password in. And it's then going to take me back to our website and say Google's wanting permission to do certain things. We're going to accept that. We're then going to get the opportunity to nominate the username that we want for this application. I'll keep it simple and leave the username as Paul Usher and choose login. This time we're now logged in as Paul Usher, and if we take a quick look at what's happening in the database, we can see that Paul Usher has been added to this list. There's no password hash because it's all part of the external auth. So far so good. The next thing we want to do is allow an administrator to create roles for that particular site. We'll start out here by creating a new folder. And we're going to call this one admin. Inside our admin folder, we want to add a new web form. So we'll choose web form with master page. We'll call it role admin and select the default site.master as the master page. Now when the page is ready, I'm going to switch to the design view. I'm going to open up the toolbox and look for my ASPX grid view. This is one of the really powerful flagship products here at Devexpress and very, very versatile when you're working with web pages. So the grid's presented on screen. The next step is to create a data source. So choose new data source. The data source wizard's going to appear. And I choose SQL database. I'll give it a name of DS roles. Click OK. And from this list I can select my default connection, which is stored in web.config. I'm going to choose next. Now I get to select the tables that I want to interact with. So I want ASP.NET roles, I want all the fields, choose the advanced button and turn on the generate, insert, update and delete statements. Go next, test my query. Obviously there's no data there for me to have a look at, so we'll just choose finish. At this point I want to turn on the edit, new and delete buttons. And then into the properties box I want to make sure that I set the key field. It has been set as ID, which is excellent. Now when we're dealing with the identity tables, it's up to us to create the GUID or unique identifier. So to do that in this case, I'm going to switch to the event view. I'm going to scroll down to the row inserting. Now it's important that you don't do this in the inserted step, otherwise your application will crash. So double click on row inserting, and here I want to say e.newValues, which exposes a collection of fields in the data set, ID, and that's going to be equal to a GUID.newGUID, dot to string. So what's going to happen here, as soon as the grid detects that we're inserting a row, it's going to automatically populate the ID field with our new GUID. If I save that, close, and just run, I should now have a really cool editing tool for my roles table. We'll get to the securing part of this process in a little while. I can choose New, and I can type Administrator as a role. Update, and here we can see the ID has been added and the name. Now it's less than optimal to have this ID field showing as far as the user is concerned. We don't want them to be able to touch that ID column. So let's take a look at what we can do to handle that. First of all, we'll exit out of the browser. Let's jump into the columns editor. And on the ID column, I'm going to look at the edit form settings. Simply turn visible to false on edit form. So now when I run, I've got my role admin page loading. I'm going to go New, and name, there's no ID there. We'll create a new role called General and update that. A quick look in the SQL backend is going to show that those fields have been, or rows have been added directly to that table, which is what we want. So we can add users using the inbuilt registration login process. We can now create new roles. The final step is to link the user ID and the role together. There's a couple of steps involved at that point. Exit out of here. We will add a new web form into this admin folder. We're going to say add web form with master page, and this time we'll call it user admin. Again, based on site.master. Switch to the design view, and as I did before, I'm going to add in the ASPX grid view control. Only this time we've need to do something a little different with the bindings. We still need a main data source, so we can say new data source, and database, it's going to be DS role admin. Click OK. Choose my default connection string, next. And instead of picking a table, I want to specify a custom SQL statement. I'm going to choose next, and I'm just going to paste that SQL statement in. Effectively what we're saying is we want the ID from the user table mapped to a field called user ID, and we want the role ID from the ASP.NET user roles table mapped to a field called role ID. I need to do something with the update statement, which we'll come back to. So let's just go next, test, and we can see straight away that it's populating the left hand side of my information here. The next step is to actually create a stored procedure. We'll switch over to SQL Server Manager and paste in our stored procedure. The beauty of using stored procedures in this example is the fact that one piece of code can handle an insert or an update. You don't have to worry about it. And quite often this is what will happen in the background of some of the wizards and data source options. We've got the procedure name of save role. It takes in a user ID and a role ID. It comes through to determine if the user ID already exists. It will run an update. If the user ID doesn't exist, it will insert it. All we need to do here is just execute that statement. And now inside the programmability stored procedure section, we can see that we've got a stored procedure called save role. So back inside Visual Studio, I'm going to choose my DS role admin, configure the data source, step through the wizard. We're leaving the first piece of SQL as was. And now we're interested in the update statement. We're going to switch from a SQL statement to a stored procedure, choose next, and finish. We're not actually adding new records to this table. We're only interested in users that exist. So what we're going to do here is make sure that only the Show Edit button is visible. The other thing we want to do is make sure that the end user cannot touch the user ID column. So like we did before, we're going to come to the column editor, click on user ID, edit form settings, and make the visibility false for that. So far that would work, but what we end up with are two columns of GUIDs or IDs. We need to represent that in something more meaningful for our user. To achieve that, we're going to add a couple more data sources. Open up my toolbox and choose SQL data source and drop that onto the form. We'll start by renaming it and call it DS users. We're going to handle the left-hand column to start with. Now if I configure that data source, pick my default connection string, I'm only interested in the users and I only want the ID and username at that point. I don't need to handle anything else, just two fields. Click finish, and I want to do exactly the same thing this time with the roles. We'll change that to DS roles. Come in and configure the data source, default connection, next, and pick .NET roles. There are only two fields, we'll leave that as is, and finish. Now we need to tie those into the grid, and this is just some of the cool power that's offered inside this grid control. I'm going to jump into the column editor, choose the first column, which is user ID, and change that to a combo box column. I can then click on the combo box properties tab, come down to the data source and set that to DS users. I want the text field to be the username, I want the value field to be ID, and I want the text field format string to be the second field. So we'll do a number 1 inside the curly braces. We want to do a similar thing on role ID, so we'll change that to a drop down or a combo column. Come in here, change the data source to DS roles this time. The text field is going to be name, the value field is ID, and same thing with the text format string. Now there's one other critical step I need to do here, and that's make sure that that key value field has been set in the grid. So key field name will become user ID. Now if I've wired everything up correctly at this point, all I need to do is run this application on this page, and I'm going to be able to assign those roles to users. Currently I've got 2 users and 2 roles. Let's see what happens. Here we can see the user ID. I can choose edit. It's only allowing me to select the role ID, so I'm going to choose general and update, and I'll set the administrator to a role of administration. Update. A quick look back inside SQL. If we run those select statements again, and we can see now that we've got a mapping of user ID to role ID inside the table. So everything is wired up correctly, and we've got a basic UI to play with as well. The next critical step obviously is to secure these pages, because we only want this to be an administrator role. And this is one of the simple steps in this whole process. Right click the admin folder, choose add, web config file. I'll leave the name as web.config, and I've got a blank web config file. I'm going to come in here and choose authorization. I'm going to say allow roles administrator. I'm then going to say deny users all. Now the actual process of this, the authorization engine is going to check in that order, and it's going to say, is the user that's authenticated part of the administrator role? Yes, proceed. Otherwise it's going to hit the deny, which is clearly saying deny everybody. So if I put these lines in back to front, or do the deny first, I'm never going to get access to that page. So that's important. Now if I run the application, I'll start out at my default page, and I won't be logged in. I'll run through to my admin and just do my user admin URL, and it's going to wrap me back into a login before it gives me a return to my page. If I try and log in as Paul Usher, it's going to repeat that process because it's going to say Paul Usher does not belong to that group. However, if I log in as admin, it's going to switch me through to the original page and I get my editing. So straight away I've secured that portion of my website and every page under there to that role. We can extend that to another area. Let's create a new folder. We'll call this one General. Inside General, I'm going to create just a quick web form page, web form with master page, and we'll call this one General Info. Click OK. Go to Design. And it may be that everybody who's authenticated for this particular area can see our team calendar. The ASPX Scheduler Control is a very powerful tool when it comes to planning, doing dates, looking at calendars. I'm not going to do any of the binding today, just simply show how it can be rendered inside that special area. So right now General is available to everybody. We'll repeat that process of adding in the web config file. Inside here I'm going to do the authorization again, and I'm going to say allow. This time I want multiple roles because I want anybody who's inside the administrator role and anybody who's in the general role. Again, I want to deny everybody else, so I'll deny users, everybody. If I run the application now, what we'll see, I'm going to be sent to the default page. I'm going to try and go to General/General Info, and I get wrapped back to the login page. I'm going to register as a new user, and I'm going to say my name is Fred. Create the account. So we know that it's an authenticated user, but still you'll have no access to that page. You'd actually have to log in as a valid user, either as admin, or we'll log in under the Google Auth account just to prove that it all works. Starting with the username and password again. That should wrap us straight back into our application because it's already been a pre-authorized account. And on the basis that that user belongs to that role, it's going to allow me to see the page. So here's the forward happening. And we can see the schedule control in all its glory, allowing me to do things like create new appointment, etc., etc. So there we have a really effective way of creating role administration, linking users to roles, and protecting core content on your website using ASP.NET.Identity Framework and a few Devexpress controls. Well, thanks to everybody for taking part today. My contact details are on screen. If you haven't downloaded the Devexpress toolset, there is a free trial available at devexpress.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time.